Also, on that point, in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul actually lists the 12 separately from Peter. So, I mean, even if you wanted to assume that there were 12 disciples and that Paul mentions the 12 as being the 12 disciples, that would seem to indicate that Peter was not part of the 12 disciples.
1 Corinthians 15.
Yeah, it's like 3-8.
I'm going to look that up. 3-8? I'll look that up right now.
Yep.
You don't mind if I look stuff up, do you?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Unfortunately, I don't have a positronic brain, so I don't have the entire Bible committed to memory.
I mean, I don't either. I've just had this discussion so many times that I know the verses.
Well, right. And then mostly dealing with Protestants who are also believers, a lot of this stuff doesn't come up in my research. So it does say, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that could easily just mean that he appeared to Peter by himself, and then he appeared to the 12 together. That doesn't necessarily discount Peter as being part of the 12.
I mean, I agree that you can explain it on both ideas.
Right.
But the 12 is never explicitly identified as being the disciples. There were also 12 tribes of Israel. So, I mean,
right, which is why there are 12 disciples.
Right. And Paul could easily mean that the 12 are the 12, tribes of Israel. I mean, I do agree that it's possible that there were 12 disciples, but my point is that there's no evidence given in that disciples were ever a thing.
So would you agree? Would you agree that when there is a field of study, whatever that field of study is, and that when there is a consensus within that field of study? So we talked earlier off the air about your flat Earth videos and stuff like that. So obviously the scientific consensus is that the Earth is round. To the point where if you believe the Earth is any shape other than round, you look ridiculous.
Well, yeah, so but I mean that's because of the. Well, I mean that's because of the direct evidence that we have of.
Right. No, granted, there is physical scientific evidence. I can go outside right now and prove the Earth is round in 15 minutes. But disregarding that, would you agree that in general, if there is a consensus within a certain field of study, that if your hypothesis is contrary to that consensus, that you need to be able to back that hypothesis up with some kind of positive evidence and not just explaining away the evidence that has led to the consensus that we do have? Would you agree with that?
I mean, I do think that I need to have an argument for my position. I need to put forth positive evidence for my position. But I mean, there's Raphael Lataster's questioning the historicity of Jesus that has information in it. There's also, this is the pop level version, Jesus from Outer Space of Dr. Carrier's academic book that's much more substantial in its references and its information. But I mean, there's already the positive case that's been made in the academic scholarship that's challenged the consensus. So I think that it's incumbent upon me to be able to provide my positive argument for my position, but also I need to be able to explain why the evidence that the consensus gives isn't sufficient for their conclusion.
Right.
So it's kind of it's a combination of what you said.
But okay. But it just seems to me, and like I said this in my video that I did responding to you originally, it just seems like you're taking the evidence that's there and just setting it to the side.
But I'm not, because I have reasons for discounting the current evidence. Like, we haven't gone through all of the evidence that's normally espoused. So, I mean, if you have a particular topic that you want to talk about, I'm perfectly fine talking about it. But I'm just going to tell you right now, like, I have reasons, argumentation, and evidence.
All right. Let's stick with Paul for a minute, okay? In Galatians 4, chapter 4, Paul writes that Jesus was born of a woman under the law. How does that not explicitly state that he was born a Jew in the flesh, to a human woman under the law of Moses?
Right. So what are the Greek words that are used there for born of a woman?
The Greek words?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to Google that.
Okay, well, generally in that particular portion, which I typically read whenever I look at Paul for these kinds of topics, I look at the interlinear text that has like the Greek word and then what it translates into.
And I've done that. I've done that quite a bit as well. I actually did that in a video I uploaded this morning. But I have to actually Google the passage and click on, the interlinear. I don't have it committed to memory.
Right. Well, so for Galatians 4, I believe it's 4:4, when he says born of a woman, he's actually using genomai of a woman. And genomai is a kind of a weird way, if you want to say born, for this particular topic. And that's just dealing with the phrase there. I know born of a woman is a phrase that's used in the Old Testament, most notably in like Job, to refer to somebody of a human origin. But the difference there is that they use the word genao, which is more explicit about being born. And Paul explicitly uses genomai for some reason. And the only other places where Paul uses genomai in reference to bodies is when he's talking about Adam's body, which was manufactured by God, and our future resurrection bodies, which are also manufactured by God. And so it kind of seems like if we're going with the trend there, that it would seem to indicate that he's meaning like a manufactured body whenever he's saying born of a woman, because it's not only in Galatians 4:4 where Paul uses genomai in a born of the woman sense, he also uses it, I believe, in, well, not exactly. I know it's like in Romans 9:5 maybe. He talks about, Jesus being the seed of David, or some people normally,
and then in Philippians 2:5-8, he talks about Jesus being born in the form and the likeness of man.
Right. I'm not sure about the Philippians verse, but what I do know is that genomai typically is rendered as made. It can mean to be born. That is one particular use of it. But what we have to look at is, how does Paul use the word? How does he use the word in order to indicate this?
And again, I'll just read it. It's just one verse. Galatians chapter 4, verse 4. He says, but when the time had fully come, because he's talking about, the Old Testament and the law and, the Messiah. When the time had fully come, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law.
Right.
So
and then can you
using that context. Hold on. Okay.
Hold on. Can you go to 4:24 for me though?
Yeah, Galatians.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he says, now this is an allegory. These women are two covenants, but that he's not talking about the same thing as he is over here, though.
Well,
he's talking over here about.
Hold on.
But down here in 21, he's talking about Hagar and Sarah. He's not talking about.
He's also But I mean, that's the woman or the women that he's talking about throughout this entire allegory that he starts at the end of chapter 3. So he's telling you right there that these things are to be taken figuratively, that these women represent two covenants. Like when he says that, God sent his son born of a woman born under the law, that was Jesus being, given a body of flesh that was under the law, because you're not born under the law in Judaism. You have to be circumcised 8 days after your birth, and then you're placed under the law. If you're not circumcised, then you're actually supposed to be shunned from the Jewish society, and you're thrown out because you're no longer a Jew. So you can't technically be born under the law unless you're got a body made by God, which is already circumcised when he made it.
See, I just don't agree, though, that these are the same thoughts at the beginning of chapter, because the beginning of chapter 4, and this is where chapters and verses can be confusing, because they don't have any real rhyme or reason. They were just kind of just randomly assigned all over the place. But in the beginning of chapter 4, the first 7 verses, he's still continuing his previous thought from chapter 3. And then he goes on to a new thought after that.
No, he doesn't.
So when he's talking about Jesus being born,
same argument. This entire thing is explaining Jesus' sacrifice and how we're able to attain salvation from our sins. Like it's the entire process for how that works in Christianity. And him saying that these things are to be taken figuratively, these are two covenants. One is the covenant from Mount Sinai, and bears children who are to be slaves. And it says right up top where it says, so you are no longer a slave, but God's child. I mean, he's still explaining the exact same concept here throughout chapter 4. I don't see how you can get around that. Like, he's explaining how you go from being a slave under the laws of Moses to being free under this new covenant that Jesus provided with his death.
Right. And that's the allegorical part. That's the allegorical
starts
part.
At the end of chapter 3 and goes all the way through chapter 4. The entire thing's an allegorical explanation for the sacrifice of Jesus.
One thing is allegorical. Okay, so I'm not a young Earth creationist. Okay, I don't believe in the biblical creation story as told in the first chapter of Genesis. Okay, I think that's allegorical. Okay, however, I do believe in a literal Adam and Eve.
But my entire point here is that the entire thing is an allegory. It's either an allegory or it's explaining the allegory in chapter 4. And I'm not saying that, this one particular section says that there's a metaphor or something like that. That means the entire thing is. I'm taking a look at the end of chapter 3 and going all the way through chapter 4. That's an entire allegorical teaching